Good evening and welcome to iResolve. I am Rhonda Haynes and I serve as Executive Director of the National Association for Urban Debate Leagues, also known as NADL. When criminal justice reform was announced as this year's high school debate topic, we at NADL knew we had to do something beyond competition. In developing the concept for iResolve, we set out to engage young people in real conversation about criminal justice reform. During tonight's program, students representing the Houston Urban Debate League will explore strategies to reallocate funding in police departments in conversation with community leaders from their Houston community. A timely and important topic, and so we're really excited about having you all here, and we do thank you for supporting us. With iResolve, debaters move beyond competition and into the realm of real-world solutions, taking on tough topics and engaging respected experts and professionals along the way. There won't be any small talk here tonight, folks. So just sit there and listen in, and I'm very sure you will be impressed and you will find their points extremely thoughtful and engaging. I would like to personally thank the Asia Group Foundation as series sponsor and Massey and Gill as exclusive presenting sponsor of iResolve. Your commitment to debate and NADL in particular is both outstanding and astounding. We could not do this work without you, and so for that, I am grateful. Thank you. Finally, I am excited to welcome to the virtual stage Deirdre Heichel, who serves as General Counsel of TIA, the Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association. It's so hard for me to summarize Deirdre's interest and expertise, so please do indulge me as I share for a bit. Deirdre is the General Counsel of TIA Financial Solutions and a member of the TFS. TIA Financial Solutions is also known as TFS. So Deirdre is a member of the executive leadership team at TFS, where she manages and coordinates the delivery of legal services to enable TIA's core retirement and retail business. She is a proud executive co-sponsor of Unite, the Latinx business resource group of TIA. She previously served as head of litigation and the strategy and continues to lead high-profile litigation matters in her new role. It is worth mentioning that Deirdre was also a partner at Wilkie Farr and Gallagher prior to joining TIA in 2016. She also has broad management experience, has served as the chair of the Women's Professional Development and Staff Committees, lead hiring partner on the Professional and Personnel Committee, and held roles on both the Diversity and Pro Bono committees. Earlier in her career, Deirdre clerked for the Honorable James H. Michael Jr. of the United States Circuit Court for the Western District of Virginia. Deirdre serves on the Board of Mobilization for Justice, a nonprofit organization providing legal services on civil rights issues to low-income New Yorkers, and is a member of Capacito, a network of Latina lawyers in the New York tri-state area. Deirdre, I have to say, I am very intrigued, and I look forward to your sharing with us this evening. We are so very honored to have you join us. Welcome.
Thank you, Rhonda, for that really generous introduction. I appreciate it. And I am really honored to be with all of you tonight, not only to hear what I'm sure is going to be a very lively and informative debate, but to really celebrate the art of debate. In a lot of ways, as I thought about tonight, I could really say I have spent my career debating, my entire career. I think my mom might say my entire life, but that's a different speech. But as I think about it, debate provides us with training in critical thinking, research, advocacy, comparing evidence, public speaking, evaluating biases, and these attributes have been particularly fundamental to my success as a litigator. And, if you think about what a litigator does in terms of representing one side in a legal dispute, in a case, I think of any case as one really long debate, punctuated by actual debates in front of the judge, and sometimes culminating in a debate, what I would say is a debate in front of a jury. And so for me, the keys to a successful debate are really listening and understanding your opponent's position. So when you assume that your opponent doesn't get it or they're stupid, to me, that is falling into a trap and really leaving yourself open for a blindside. I like to assume that my opponent gets it, is as passionate and as informed as I am about the issues, because I really want to understand their very best thinking and then dismantle it piece by piece. And I think that's the key to being successful in debate. But for me, it's not just these skills that have helped me in the courtroom, but as my roles have changed and I have moved out of litigation into advising businesses on legal matters, I realize that debate carries beyond the courtroom and frankly, beyond lawyers and beyond politicians. In corporate America, as an executive at a Fortune 100 company, debate is a critical part of everything that I do. I have a team. I'm advocating for resources for that team. There's a scarce set of resources. I need to debate finance to get my team what they want or what they need or what I think they need. There's also healthy internal debates in corporate America about the direction and the strategy that a company should go in. And so all of these skills can serve you well in many facets of a future career. And I would argue just in life in general. But even though we know that these skills are important and research shows that the skills learned in debate will help students succeed in college and beyond, we don't fund it. Right? I mean, there are not a lot of debate clubs in public high schools. I went to public high school. It was not a particularly well-funded public high school, and we did not have a debate club. But what we did have was a local lawyer who volunteered his time to coach a small mock trial team. And so I was a member of that team. And the lessons that I learned doing mock trial in high school really stayed with me. Beyond high school, beyond law school, even to when I was a junior associate at a firm and working with witnesses. And what that showed me is the value and the impact of providing real world practical skills and experience to high school students. And that's why I think that the work of NODL is so important. And I commend the students for investing in their future selves. I'm very excited about getting civic and community leaders to participate in this debate series this year. I think it's a terrific idea because just imagine if our cable news media or politicians in Washington engaged in the type of debate that I'm expecting us to see here tonight. Not echo chambers, not demonization of people with opposing viewpoints, but honest, intellectual debate. Just think of how much more informed we might be as a society. And I would argue probably a less polarized society, because I think debate doesn't have to be personal. I think it leaves room for convincing people to credit your overall position and allowing them room to maintain a contrary view. You don't have to win everything. You just have to be informed and persuasive enough to get people over the fence to support your position. And so I am really looking forward to tonight's debate. I can't wait to hear what Amaya and Mohammed have to say about, because the topic of criminal justice reform, it really impacts all of us. And I think in society, so often we don't focus on what our youth has to say about critical issues. So to get to hear from your perspective, the debates that I have had in New York and California with my peers, I think is really exciting. And I am so happy to have the opportunity to be here with you tonight. So without further ado, I know we want to get on with the program. So I'd like to introduce Eric Emerson, the chairman of the board of Huddle.
Welcome. On behalf of the board of the Houston Urban Debate League, or Huddle, I want to thank everyone for attending. My name is Eric Emerson, and I'm the board chair. To save time so we can focus on the students and the debaters themselves, my words will be brief, but my gratitude will be endless. I want to begin by thanking HISD, the board members who are here today that represent HISD, the past board members who have served and who we've been able to build relationships with, To our directors, Mark Niles and John Rassenfoss, under the UIL leadership of Don Hernandez, I want to send thanks to all of the partners in HISD, who, in 2008, when we reached out to them, we were able to create 12 debate programs in schools that were traditionally underserved. And since then, we've been able to grow with the partnership that we have with HISD to serve 25 high schools and have a robust middle school league. Thanks. Thanks also to our expansion league, to the Case for Kids and the Harris County Department of Education. We've been able to move Huddle beyond the city of Houston into the surrounding county area. And we currently serve 17 schools representing 7 districts and 3 charter schools. And this couldn't be possible without the leadership of Tony Candace and Lisa Carruthers and others at the Harris County Department of Education board level. And so my gratitudes go out to them and to our Huddle program director, Andy Stubbs and Javier, and to all the many people who've worked on the project. Most important thanks probably goes to our coaches and our students, because we're going to get a great sample tonight of some amazing debaters, but this is happening all across Houston on any given weekend. And it's done because of the dedication and the commitment of our students and coaches, the extra time commitment, and the development of skills. And I want to thank them. And then finally, I want to thank our partners at Noddle. You don't know Sarah Sanchez, but she's an amazing person who made this happen tonight. Luke Hill is also pretty good. Rhonda Haynes is an amazing leader of Noddle, excuse me. And in case you didn't know, we've been going through very difficult times in education. And her leadership has been instrumental in our ability to transition into a virtual world with best practices, and I can't thank her enough for what she's done. So why are we here from the Huddle perspective? Debate's a powerful tool. We see it in our students' test scores, their academic achievement, and we can do data science on all of it. We see it in their social emotional development, their ability to become, this sense of community that they express to us that the tournament gives them, and the feelings of joy they get when they hear they come into a Huddle tournament. And few activities at a school can develop the kinds of advocacy skills that will benefit the students and their communities. And debates over criminal justice, even in Houston, are more timely now than ever. It could not be more important. And we've seen it over the summer, in which there's been much strife and much conflict. And where there's strife and conflict, there's space for debate, the ability for us to have democracy and dialogue and to engage in discussions and to channel our rage into positive solutions that are forward thinking. And hopefully the students that we'll see tonight and the students in Huddle will be leaders for the future, and they're going to create positive social change. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our alternates, the first alternates who will speak about our panelists and the skills that they possess. Our first alternate is Olutobi Adeyeri. She's a 9th grader at DeBakey High School for health professionals. And our second alternate is Morgan Montgomery, who's an 11th grader at Spring Early College.
My name is Morgan Montgomery. So,
okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Olutobi Adeyeri, and as Mr. Emerson said, I am a first-year student at DeBakey High School for Health Professions. But I'm also a debater, and as a debater, tonight it is my extreme honor and privilege to introduce to you our distinguished panel of guests from the Houston community, as well as a debater that will represent Houston ISD. On our panel of questioners tonight, we have Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez, HISD Board of Education Trustee Elizabeth Santos, and finally, we have Professor Gary Bledsoe, former Dean of the Texas Southern University Thurgood Marshall School of Law. This evening, our panelists will provide us with their expert insight on the criminal justice issues our debaters will debate. The debater representing Houston ISD is Amaya Jacobs. She's a junior at Westside High School and has been debating for 3 years. During this period, she has participated in LD, World Schools, and PF, all forms of debate. She believes that debate has made her more knowledgeable on an array of pressing issues, helped her develop her public speaking skills, and eloquently express her ideas. In this evening's debate, she will be advocating for greater investment into our police force. Both debaters have worked hard to prepare their cases, and we hope that you find this public debate informative, engaging, and entertaining. Thank you.
okay, I will be introducing Barbara Ronowski. She grew up in Houston and entered the University of Houston at the age of 16 on a national merit 4-year academic scholarship. She received a BA in 1976, graduating. She then attended law school at the University of Texas School of Law, and she graduated with her honors. Nick Spencer, he is a lawyer and a Houston resident. His practice focused on primarily a real estate and civil legislation, with a heavy emphasis on investor issues. Bill Kelly, he is a director of government relations and the City of Houston's mayor's office. David Young practiced law and attended the University of Houston of Law School. And Mohammed Hemienda, um, he is my debate colleague, and he is a senior and debate captain for our organization.
Hello, can I get a confirmation? Everyone can hear me? Okay, great. Thank you, Morgan, for the introduction. I'm waiting on my opponent now. Hey, Maya.
Hello.
So before I start my speech, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Mohammed Hamida. You've already heard. I'm a senior at Spring Valley College Academy. Let me quickly thank the National Association of Urban Debate Leagues, the Harris County Case Debates Initiative, and the Houston Urban Debate League for giving a high schooler like me a platform to voice my opinion on a topic of unparalleled importance. Daniel Pruitt suffered from a mental illness. One snowy morning, he left his brother's house in Rochester, New York, and his brother called 911, worried sick. When the police came, they found a naked, scared Pruitt in the middle of the street. They didn't clothe him. They didn't talk to him. They handcuffed him, hooded him. They put their bodies on him until the 41-year-old died of asphyxiation. The costs of bad policing have for too long been swept under the rug, and it's time we address them. Because it's not just money. It's lost time, it's lost lives, it's terror in marginalized communities. Today, I rise in advocacy of significantly disinvesting in a system which misguidedly views policing as the solution to all of society's problems. I'll start the speech by explaining why disinvestment is the best option for the most vulnerable in society. I'll then give examples of sectors which can greatly benefit from exorbitant funding currently going to police departments, before I close off by summarizing the impact this proposal would have on our city's finances and economy as a whole. Let's start with the obvious. Limiting the role of police would significantly curb the plague of unnecessary violent encounters we've seen between law enforcement and the public. In 2018, the American Public Health Association declared police violence a public health issue. Psychological and physical violence that follows from sending police to deal with any situation anywhere results in deaths, injuries, trauma, and stress. But more importantly, let's look at those groups we need to consider before anything else, the vulnerable. Marginalized communities have been screaming, "I can't breathe," since the establishment of police in the US. Today, only 5% of all arrests are made for violent offenses, while nearly 95% are for things which don't really threaten public safety, and the majority of those less serious arrests are made in Black and lower income communities. Defunding would be a step towards alleviating the constant violence imposed upon lower income communities because of over-policing. Yet even though unnecessary assignment of roles to police is the ultimate harm addressed today, disinvesting in police also allows us to reap the benefits of funding in other crucial areas, one of which is public health. Our very own state of Texas ranks 40th among the 50 states for public health funding, spending just $17 for each person in the state in 2019. Congressional internal cuts to our state's Department of Health, as well as a trend of cutting funds for public health and increasing funding for the police apparatus, left us wholly unprepared for the coronavirus pandemic. Stockpile requests for ventilators and ICUs stacked up, while the only stockpile that actually grew was that of local police departments. Even a marginal amount of the funds currently going to policing would boost our public health sector and would have saved thousands in the lives of COVID-19, in the wakes of COVID-19. Yet another crucial and sadly underfunded sector in our state is education. Texas ranks 36th nationally in spending per student. A drop in state aid for local school districts since 2017 took place in the same time that both the city of Houston and Texas funding for law enforcement increased drastically. The education of our children is a fundamental pillar of our society, and it's even more vital now that we use it to empower students in disadvantaged communities. And finally, the sector which most clearly demonstrates the need to reduce investment in policing, social work, and mental health. Reallocating funds to social work in actual fact doesn't change police budgets much, if at all. This is because although the money is going to the police, social workers are still the ones in the status quo connecting with and directly assisting people in marginalized communities. Police officers need less than 2 months of training to start presumably doing work, which takes real social workers over 100 weeks, or nearly 2 years to train for. Social workers provide preventive as well as treatment services, and it's illogical and counterproductive to keep diverting funds from them just to put it towards powering a police department. The commonality between all three and so many more of those areas which desperately need funding is that even an insignificant reallocation of spending from police departments to those sectors would make a huge difference for our city, for our state, for our country. Diverting funds from policing to other crucial functions of our community would not only significantly curtail the magnitude of unnecessary arrests and violent encounters, especially in marginalized communities, but it would also mean education, public health, and social work flourish. We can use the money to build up cities' capacity for crisis care, but also to hire public servants better suited to many of the tasks that consume police officers' time, from dealing with traffic problems to assisting with substance dependency issues. Disinvesting in police is something we should have done from the start. But since we didn't, let's not waste any time in correcting it now.
Hello, Mohammed. The first question I want to ask you is about how is creating an entire program outside of the police force going to help the actual problem of police injustices that happen daily?
So I think the fundamental problem that we see in the status quo is that we're using police to solve every single problem that society could possibly think of. And that's bad, because the result is that we see a lot of unnecessary violence, especially in poorer areas. So I think the way to solve that is by limiting police roles to curbing violence and responding to crime, instead of using, again, police for every situation, which they may not be and are proven not to be ideal for.
Thank you. And the other question I have for you is, how will upper class citizens feel when the funds for police decrease?
And can you clarify why would they be concerned if funds for police decrease?
Because normally when there's a decrease in funding towards police, there will be job cuts. And so with these job cuts leads to a decrease in officers that are able to be on field. And so with this, it'll cause like a fear in upper class communities, to which they'll be more reliant on privatized security companies for protection, which will lead to biased acts being committed based on
right. So I think there's like one very important thing to note here. Police departments are exorbitantly overfunded, which means that they're getting funds for things that we shouldn't be using police for in the first place. My plan will take away funds that are currently going to things like social work, to things like mental health, and we'll reallocate them to departments outside of it. We're not cutting into the police budget that they actually need to enforce like crime control laws. We're not cutting into the police budget to respond quickly to calls in violent situations. The only thing we're cutting is really what we're going to move to other departments like social work, like mental health, things the police shouldn't be doing in the first place.
Okay. The final question I have is, how will us as citizens benefit from there being other organizations outside of the police force?
Right. So I think, as I've already mentioned, it's much better to have specialized social workers or mental health counselors. And it's also much better for us, especially people in vulnerable communities, to know that they're going to be safe. If they call the police, there's no chance of them being shot because they're calling them specifically to respond to a violent situation. It's the only thing the police are going to do. However, if I have a mental health issue, I'm not going to call the police if I'm a Black person in a poor community, because again, there is a good chance that I get shot because the same person who's supposed to respond to mental health isn't a mental health counselor, but rather is a police officer who's armed with a Glock.
Okay, thank you. I'll now begin my speech. Before I begin, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Amaya Jacob, and I'm a junior at Westside High School. I would first like to thank the National Association of Urban Debate Leagues for hosting such an event where I'm able to express myself and talk about real-world issues that are affecting our world every day. Next, I would like to thank the Houston Urban Debate League for selecting me to be a part of an astounding event. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for making time out of your busy schedules for attending tonight. When facing an emergency, you typically think to call on a well-trained person to help. Unfortunately, this innocent request had severe repercussions for Golda Barton, whose 13-year-old son, Lyndon, suffers from Asperger's syndrome. She specifically called on a crisis intervention team to transport Lyndon to the hospital during a mental breakdown, but instead got 4 police officers on the scene with no sort of de-escalation training. Golda watched in horror as Lyndon was shot while running away from police in a panic. Lyndon suffered life-threatening injuries. Lyndon didn't have to suffer this fate. With more refined training in the police force, along with integrated counselors and healthcare specialists on the field, the response team would have been able to quickly detect a mental health crisis and carry out defined protocol to ensure efficient de-escalation. Police brutality is an issue that has been a burden on the hearts of our nation for well over 400 years. All of the headache, heartache, and bloodshed is far too much to bear, and that is why I stand in favor of a fundamental transformation of policing into a large-scale community engagement organization with additional funding for training and the creation of departments for oversight, mental and public health services, and social work. I will make this case in 3 ways. First, by explaining why it is beneficial to create additional departments within the police force. Next, by highlighting the changes in police culture that will happen. And finally, I will be explaining how an increase in funding leads to a decrease in violence. 1. Create additional departments within the police force nationwide. We have all heard the slogan, defund the police, but in reality, how effective is this? Taking money out of an organization and creating a whole new one does not solve the problem, but heightens it. It closes the door to the original problem, which is the training in the police force. That is why investing in the police force is more efficient. You are helping alleviate the injustices that happen at the hands of the police force daily. You would not only be educating police in de-escalation techniques, but also creating departments for oversight, mental and public health services, and social work that would directly play a hand in transforming the police force exponentially. In addition, this will protect us from being in fear of forcefully arrested or even killed by those who are meant to protect us. 2. Changes in police culture. The past few months have revealed systemic problems in police culture. In cases of brutality, you often hear from spokesmen, police chiefs, and other individuals that the cause of this is a small percentage of cops that are rogue. In reality, according to Harvard Business Review, these claims are almost always false. While claims of police abuse do tend to cluster around relatively small groups of police officers, those officers tend to repeat their abusive behavior with impunity. Repeated brutality that is not addressed by higher-ups is a systemic problem, not a problem of rogue individuals. It means that the organizational message being conveyed, whether or not explicit, is that some level of abusive behavior is okay. By adding additional members to the team, it will effectively change the bad police culture by educating and implementing efficient training to members of the team. 3. Increasing funding leads to a decrease in violence. We have seen many cases where multiple officers are called to a scene with a person acting out of control. In over half of these scenarios, police feel the need to use force. This force leads to an astronomical increase in violence. That is why it is imperative to increase funding to the police force specifically. By targeting the root of the problem, which is the police force, you're working directly with the system that needs work the most, not ignoring the issue to go create another organization outside of the police force. By having an organization within the police force, you are not only helping by implementing education and training for police officers, but also ensuring that there are certified professionals who are on the scene for these disturbing calls. These resources that will be given to the police organization will go into training and equipping police officers, counselors, and social workers to work as a team to effectively de-escalate these scenarios while also upholding their civic duty to serve and protect all citizens. De-escalation leads to a decrease in violence by allowing officers and members of the response team to effectively recognize the problem and fix it without using unnecessary force. In Canada, a similar model was tested and proved to work tremendously. According to Dr. Peter Silverstone, it allowed for officers to improve their interactions in real-life situations, while also decreasing the violence that happened in the community. Having programs within the police department is fundamental, as it does not sweep the actual problem under the rug. Police will get better training while also having certified individuals on field with them to help them with de-escalation processes and the protection of the citizens. Therefore, I ask you to join me in increasing funding to the police to help make them a better organization that serves all Americans. Thank you.
So in the example you gave at the top of your speech, you already seem to agree the police were an ideal solution. Given that the victim wasn't a threat, why was there a need for the presence of armed officers in the first place?
Right. So this example is exactly the reason why we need to implement these de-escalation techniques while also educating police officers and having counselors and therapists on scene with the police officers to help them with this de-escalation process, and not just sending 4 officers to a scene with guns to help to try to de-escalate the situation.
Okay, speaking of like de-escalation training, why do you think training would solve like oversight issues in the police, which is why this happens in the first place? I mean, if we think of like the Minneapolis Police Department, they were one of the examples in the nation for following like federal guidelines on bias training and nonviolent encounters training, and yet they're still like regarded as one of the most corrupt or one of the most violent police departments in the country.
Right. So the difference between them and my model is that we're not only just educating police officers in this low intensive training process, but we're having an intensive training as well as these other individuals that come in with them whose main purpose is to help, right? So you give a police officer a gun and that's the power that you're giving them. If you implement these other people into them whose focus is to help people, then they won't all necessarily be like there to do bad things.
Okay, so on that point, since we seem to agree that like police culture is currently maligned, how do you know that adding social workers and counselors into the police force would change police culture rather than just blending those workers and counselors into that same culture?
Right, that's an excellent question. So by implementing social workers and therapists on field with police officers, you're having people with a bunch of different backgrounds come together and put their mind together on how to de-escalate situations, right? So you're not only having someone who wants to be a police and protect, but you're also having someone who wants to be a social worker who wants to help other people in other aspects than police might have went into the field as well.
Okay, if I can just get one more question in. Why would giving an officer more things to do erode the sense of security they'd still get from the fact that the oversight process is literally just the police investigating themselves?
Right. That's an excellent question as well. So we're not giving them multiple roles. However, we're giving them knowledge. We're giving them knowledge. And then we're also giving them other people to help with this process. So actually, they won't be taking on all these different roles. They'll be having two or three other people along with them to help them with this process.
Thank you so much to both of our debaters. My name is Sarah Sanchez. I'm the National Program and Communications Manager at NODL, and I am so excited to introduce to you our first questioner panelist. You know, iResolve is a unique format, and one of the things that we were so excited about here is that we have a long period of engagement here where our debaters will take questions from some of our experts, then they will integrate that feedback into their final speeches. So with no further ado, I'm excited to bring to the virtual stage Elizabeth Santos, who is from the Board of Trustees for the Houston Independent School District. And once Elizabeth has joined us, I will leave you, Elizabeth, the questioning stage.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much. Your debates were both insightful and I appreciate them. Right now, the Houston Independent School District has a police committee addressing the police roles in schools and basically how the police and schools contribute to the school to prison pipeline. Many have argued that having police in communities of color incites more violence. However, my question to you, Mohammed, is going to be when there's an absence of a police or in socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods and in schools that are in socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods, people don't feel safe because they believe that police are there to protect them, which in oftentimes they are. I was a teacher for 10 years in Title I schools. So in what you propose, Mohammed, how will that absence of police kind of, how can we bridge that gap if there are no police, and how will people feel safe if there are no police on school campuses or in communities of color?
Right. Thank you very much for that question. I think there's like two things here. The first is a clarification on the plan. Police presence, or like the police's ability to respond to crimes and calls, doesn't decrease at all because we don't cut into that budget whatsoever, just because we're reallocating funds that are going to like social work and mental health. But the second thing is currently police are doing a lot of jobs that they don't need to be doing, which means we have like over policing. And like, I agree that the presence of police right now can like give this sense of safety or this guise of safety. I think that once we limit police to just policing, people are going to know that whenever they call the police, not only do they respond efficiently, but they also like don't have like they aren't as prone to violence, and there's less of a chance that you're like, for example, going to get shot by a police officer, especially if you're in one of those marginalized communities that you're talking about. So I think this one will increase the sense of security for people, and they trust the police more, increases community relations and improves it. And second, the plan isn't really cutting much into police's ability to actually respond to crimes. So I don't think that'll change.
Yes, I apologize for that. I did read that and I forgot to unmute. Sorry.
You are totally fine. I'm going to leave you, and you just want to start from the top one more time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, so Amaya, you said that you were addressing this issue by three different things. You're creating additional funding for each department, for the police department, changing the police culture, and increasing funding. So you specifically mentioned that you're going to the root of these issues, but of the issue. However, I'm going to push back because it is my belief that police were created with a bias. So the fault does not lie in the police department, but in the systems that were in place that created the police department. So if the root of the issue is the police department, how are communities of color going to be affected when you increase the power of the police department?
So in my plan, we're not just freely giving the police department, like, here's like an extra amount of money for like whatever you want to use it for right now. We're specifically implementing these plans for education, one, and then also implementing like these social workers, like I mentioned on case, these social workers and everyone else that'll be involved in the process of educating police. And that's how I plan to when I say solve the root of the problem, which is like the bad police culture that I talk about on case as well.
Thank you. All right, y'all, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are waiting for our next panelist. Dean Bledsoe, you are welcome to join the stage. And in fact, while we're at it, just to slow down these transitions a tiny bit, Sheriff Gonzalez, you can share your audio and video as well, and whoever gets into the queue first will be our next questioner. Here is Dean Bledsoe, and I will leave the questioning to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I was very impressed with both of you. Let me first ask Mohammed, I've heard your explanation in reference to why you would change the nature of where the funding goes. But isn't it true, I think, as you just had a discussion, that you don't move one violence from one area, you're simply moving in your proposal violence in the community from being perpetrated by one group to greater violence being perpetrated by another group if you actually remove police, because in the communities that you're talking about, they need more police protection. So wouldn't it be a better idea to actually propose that we how the individuals are trained and who the people are that are selected to be police officers rather than cutting the funding, because will take away monies and other things that are very important from police officers that have earned their jobs for many years, and they depend upon those. But yours would actually eliminate their jobs, put them out into the workplace, and undermine their families and their ability to actually to be earning members of their families and take care of the financial obligations that they might have. So wouldn't it make more sense if one would simply start looking at the situation and not kick the baby out with the bathwater?
Thank you, Dean. I think for this, there's two answers here. The first is about the community, and the second is what happens to the police officers. So firstly, with the community, I think the problem is currently like we're over-policing, especially marginalized communities that were like that you're talking about in your question. I think when the over-patrolling happens, there's a sense of like there's a misguided sense of security by police cars going around like every 10 minutes. Then we think that we actually need them. What we'll find probably is that the overwhelming majority of cases where there's like violent encounters between police, especially in those communities, are either escalated by police or the police didn't need to be there in the first place. So I think again, we don't cut into the budget of police to respond to crime in those communities. They're still there. The department is still there. The department is still like able to function perfectly, even arguably more efficiently now that they're only focused on this. But also the security that these people would feel in those communities, I think would actually like increase. We can improve community relations once they can expect police to be like on their side and not against them. The second thing is regarding the police losing their jobs. I think some important things to note is one, as I've already said, there's a lot of waste in the current system, which means the police are doing things outside the purview of strictly policing. Even with the reallocation of funds, there's probably not going to be like a huge exodus of officers out of police departments. But if there is a significant like layoff anywhere in any police department, I think what happens is either two things. Either they move into the private sector, into like security or the military, or even federal enforcement, or they take on other community roles. Or the other possibility, which I think like both things can happen at once, is there are a lot of people going into the police force when they initially wanted to go into social work or mental health or education, simply because those areas aren't as appealing, because again, like the pay is almost non-existent due to a lack of funding. So I think once we implement this, like more funding in those areas, a lot of people that initially went into the police, even though they had a passion for something else, will find that job appealing and will transition to it. So I think in the end, the police officers that may be laid off, if there are any, find like other jobs they're passionate about or move into the private sector, and the communities themselves aren't affected in terms of police presence or safety.
Okay, thank you. Amaya, now for you, I would ask you to think about your argument, because it appears to me that you're arguing positions that people who are antagonistic to the minority community actually support. So do you think it is ironic, and does it undermine the effectiveness of your position to say that the people who are in support of the police and who are always criticizing the minority community are the ones that actually believe that if you put more money into the police department, that would be a better situation? And the second part of that question is that if you propose it or you implement your proposal, wouldn't it be more likely that a small component of a mental health unit or something being integrated into a larger military organization that has a corrupted culture will simply be enveloped within that culture and not be able to effectively do the work that you say that you want it to do?
Thanks for the question. So for the first part, regardless of the viewpoint or the people who support like the police force in general who want to increase funding, half the time it's increasing funding for like weaponization and things like that. When I want to invest in is the education and implementation of social workers on field during these times. And that's what we're investing. No, I'm investing specifically for the education and training of police officers, while also migrating in there, having social workers and such on scene. Now, to the second part of your question, it was similar to the question Muhammad asked, as far as like how do we know that these people that come into the police, like the police won't get into the culture that they are in as well. And so I just want to make it clear that if a police officer goes into the police force, they're going in to be a police officer, and that is their viewpoint on things. Now, if a social worker goes into the same path, they're wanting to be a social worker. They're not wanting to do the harms that maybe police officers may want to have in this world that you talk about. And so that's the main that's the really big like idea of this, is that we're going to have different people from different backgrounds come together to solve a problem, instead of having a group of people that come from the same viewpoint together in solving these issues.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez. It's a pleasure to participate and tune in. Excellent job by both of you. Great discussion, great presentation, and great dialogue. I'll start off with Mohammed. My question to you is, you've indicated a couple times that there really wouldn't be impacts to police really being able to respond to crime because Many budgets are overbloated and everything, but I want to challenge that a little bit. My experience has been that most agencies, 85 to 90% of their budgets actually go to personnel. So you would, in fact, by defunding police to the level that you say, you would, in essence, be cutting into real personnel. There's not a lot of fat there when it comes to training supplies and other things like that. Most of the money does go to funding. And so, you mentioned that most of the very little violent crime actually gets solved. And perhaps you're right on that, but I think it's because most of the times we are responding to other crimes, but in cutting the funding for police, you would be actually cutting pretty deeply. So how would you account to police still being able to do the other essential jobs that may still exist with defunding?
So great question. I think that if there is a major problem funding in any police department, and I recognize that this isn't going to be the same in every police department in the country, but if there is a funding problem that cuts into the actual personnel, cuts into the efficiency in responding to crime, then it would probably be offset by this transition period where we get an immediate form of economic stimulus when we invest in these other areas. I think the last resort is that when we invest in education, social work, mental health, etc., there is good evidence that we would get the benefits almost immediately in, again, the form of economic stimulus. And I think that would result in turn the city council or city government, local governments being able to spend more on the police just to ensure we get to that marginal point where we have just enough to employ enough officers, now that we've narrowed their responsibility specifically to responding to crime, and now that we're not expecting them to do everything else, to be teachers, to be counselors, to be workers.
Okay, and my second question to you is, many times police respond because many other systems have already failed. I always say that we're in the front lines of three important issues: poverty, mental illness, and addiction. By the time that police respond to a crisis call like that, many times the family has been unable to assist, the mental health sector hasn't worked, and other areas have failed. And many times there are maybe weapons involved, maybe the person is in either in drug-induced, co-induced type situation. So how can you make sure that just sending unarmed civilians to address all those issues would be the best response?
So I think that this cuts into the root of the problem here that I'm addressing. For centuries, we've been placing this unfair expectations on every officer to be trained for everything in existence, which isn't possible. When we deploy police to go to situations where the most ideal response would not be a police officer, we're also alternatively and conversely also doing a lack of funding, allocating a lack of funding to other sectors, which is why I think they failed in the first place. Amaya's speech mentioned the case of Linden, and the reason that I think police were sent rather than mental health counselors to deal with a mental health issue is because we simply don't have a well-funded sector, a well-funded department anywhere in local governments to deal with something like that. So we instead send police because we know that they're expected to be able to handle anything, which isn't the case.
Okay, quickly moving over to Amaya. Thank you, Amaya. I appreciate you mentioning maybe a hybrid type model. I wanted to ask you, with 18,000 police departments around the country, how would you make sure that there were adequate, there would be consistency across all agencies to make sure that everybody is working to improve culture? Second part of that question would be that, culture is very hard to change. And I know that our profession is rooted in a very dark history when it comes between policing and the African-American community in particular. So it's a tough task to change that culture, that people would still have doubts about it. So how would you tackle those two concerns?
Okay, so as far as you're concerned about the police culture, the police culture is bad now because it only consists of police, right? So you constantly have police coming into the profession, corrupting, and this corruption just keeps on continuous. It's a continuous cycle that just keeps on happening. So by implementing these people with different backgrounds, it helps with that, because it's not people who want to be police. They don't want to have to harm anyone. And when these different mindsets come together to solve a problem, it will effectively build up a stronger police culture in which it won't be negative. Like, so having people from different backgrounds will become a positive thing. It won't be negative, and it will hopefully change like the police culture around. And that's what my case is talking about.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for those questions and for those answers from our debaters. Sheriff Gonzalez, please stay with me on stage. Amaya and Mohammed are going to leave the stage now. They're going to work on preparing their final summary speeches. We will hear from them again in just a few minutes. But while they are preparing those speeches, I'm going to ask the rest of our panelists to join me on stage. And I am going to turn the tables a little bit. I have some questions for our panelists. Sheriff, since you are on stage with me right now, I will start with you, but I'm just curious if the cases that Mohammed and Amaya made here today, how would they do in your line of work? How do you, I mean, obviously it's not exactly the most ideal environment for making the restructuring the funding of policing argument, but I'm curious how you think their arguments would be dealt with.
I think they're good starting points. I think that one thing that I hear maybe on both presentations are kind of broad strokes with it, and sometimes it seems like all police departments are corrupt, and on the flip side that all we have to do is say let's just intermix social workers, and all of a sudden we're going to have a different culture all of a sudden. So I think that there needs to be a little bit more compromise. I think that once I challenged Mohammed, for example, on the cutting of the funding, I think he backed up a little bit and said, oh, well, wait a minute, there'd have to be a stimulus package or something to kind of see how we could transition from one system over to another, instead of the funding kind of puts everything all of a sudden saying, let's just cut funding, period. And so I think that having a thought of what would a transition period look like, where we possibly could wean some of the things that law enforcement responds to into other areas, might be the better approach rather than just defunding. On the other one, I think that wishful thinking that we could change the culture of 18,000 police agencies at once. You're talking about having appointed and elected officials that run these agencies. So there's a lot of turnover. And so there's a lot of different leadership that steps in and out. Most police leaders aren't going to stay on the job for a very long time. And so you're going to have changes to that. And then I do like the fact that she talked about hybrid approaches, because we have some and are proven, and why should we do away with those that really are working and already hybrid working with social workers? But at the same time, we've got to deal with the elephant in the room, which is the dark history, like I said, of policing in America when it comes to Black communities, and especially Black communities. And that's something that we typically don't tackle first. And so, but I think they would do well. It would be a good starting point. I don't know that each argument in face value right now would be convincing enough, but I think that it's a good starter for the conversation.
I really appreciate that. And that's what we're here to do, is to start some conversations that our students are having. Dee Bledsoe, the same question to you. How do you think these arguments would be accepted? What types of conversations would they inspire in the professional circles that you're in?
I think they were very, very smartly presented. I think that if we take a look at what Mohammed did, he sought to address the issue by grabbing a hold of something that most people seem to agree with. The whole issue with the proper training in the mental health arena, and that officers being ill-suited for that. The example he used in New York, just one of the many examples that are out there. Thing that is widely debated. And a second smart thing in reference to engaging that way, he did engage the debate the way that it has been cast in a lot of circles, and that is that you would say defunding the police altogether, as they did in, I guess, Newark, or I think there were a couple places where they really did defund the police more than just take away a unit or two. So I think he was smart in trying not to go there and to pick out something that was widely accepted. And I think what was smart about Amaya's argument is she kind of in many ways made the same argument that Mohammed made, because what she did was she simply took the same type of fact situation and suggested that meant that you needed to have more police, and she used it to talk about the individual citizens being victims, and if more police had been available present, it might be a different situation. So I think they were both going after psychology and looking at the public discussion and weighing their arguments to how to take advantage of the public discussion and where most people were. So I thought that it was smart in how both of them decided to present their arguments, because neither one wanted to confront the argument head on, so to speak, and they chose what I think was probably an efficient path for each one of them to advance their arguments.
I agree with that. I was really impressed. You know, one of the things that we did is we spent a few weeks looking at what cases they wanted to make and how they wanted to argue them. And I thought that they really honed in on a nuance there that I was impressed by as a teacher. And that leads me into my next question for both of you, which is, what skills do you see debate developing for both Mohammed and Amaya? And how do you think that skill set would be helpful in either one of your industries? And I'll flip it this time, Dean Bledsoe. I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, obviously, it's great training to be a lawyer, because, you know, I'm a practicing lawyer besides being a professor or an administrator over at Texas Southern. So I still actually am engaged in the practice of law regularly. And I would say that what they're doing will very much help them in that regard. But, you know, there's a great book by Jerry Spence called How to Win Your Case Every Time. And in Spence's book, he talks about how the skills in that book will help you if you're a city council person, you're a citizen trying to go for your public body to try to make for a change in public policy, being able to intelligently discuss issues and being pressed to maybe even discuss issues that are different from your own point of view are really good. Because I think one of the things, and I think you made this point early, Sarah, and I think this is one thing they should always keep, and it should be instructive, and that is you should always understand the other person's argument. You know, one of the things that the great Thurgood Marshall always did, and people didn't understand it, he could go find the most racist judge and go sit down in their office if they would allow him and pick their brain. He wanted to find out the culture of that community, and he wanted to find out how people felt about different issues. And so he would not push the culture where it wouldn't go, but he would always go and try to find out information about the other side, what it was, what the things in the community that might be countervailing what he was trying to accomplish. That way he could figure out what he could do. Sometimes you do, for example, a life sentence may be the best thing he can do. He may not be able to get someone acquitted, but just to save someone from the electric chair. And I know one of the cases that he lost that I think the history has shown the man was innocent was the Lyons case out of Oklahoma. And that's one of those examples. But, you know, he sent a message back to the national office saying that there's no way for me to do anything in this community, that the authorities are so bent on doing what they want to Mr. Lyons, they never wanted to look at the truth. But he did save his life, but he stayed in prison the rest of his life. He did not commit a crime.
Such a remarkable point about knowing what is possible and tailoring your argument appropriately. Sheriff Gonzalez, I'll ask the same question to you. What are the skills that you saw demonstrated from our debaters? How do you think those would play out in your line of work or in the professions that you've been in?
Yeah, no, very well. I think in this country in general, we're lacking sophisticated debate and discussion, regardless of the viewpoint. I mean, we've seen it at the highest levels in our country, unfortunately, where we're so divided, and these are complex issues. Even defund the police, for example, has so many different meanings to so many different folks. And I think they both made very good arguments. I like how Maya structured hers as well, saying, you know, I'm going to talk about three different things, and you know, and that structure was really good. The pace, as was mentioned, I think in the chat, was very well. I think in one time, I think Amaya got a little bit excited and said like buttload, and so I think just kind of we got to maintain our composure and you know, hone in our passion a little bit, just depending on who our audience is. You know, it doesn't bother me, but again, I mean, I'm thinking more broadly here is that making sure that we remain consistent with making our arguments and kind of maintaining that level of dialogue, maintaining it a certain decorum, if you will. But I think both are great, and I look forward to the work that you're doing, and I commend you all, for supporting this and encouraging this. We definitely need more, and all the benefits that come with great debate and dialogue. It's such an art, and something that unfortunately we don't embrace enough of and encourage.
Thank you both so much for your time. You can both leave the stage. We appreciate your expertise and we appreciate your questions for our debaters. I am going to welcome back to the stage our debaters who have spent this time preparing their final summaries and integrating the feedback that they just heard from our panel. So Amaya and Mohammed should both be joining me now, and I will lead you. Mohammed, you're up.
Thank you to Ms. Santos, Dean Bledsoe, Sheriff Gonzalez, the rest of our esteemed panelists, my opponent, to everyone following. Thank you for listening and for engaging with what I had to say. As a teen, this is probably the most profound experience I could have ever asked for. George Floyd's death galvanized this nation to move the needle towards police reform. And although today we haven't regrettably had a chance to explore all the complex societal issues which underlie policing in the US, the proposal, I think, is definitively still standing. Observe some important things. Firstly, as Ms. Santos and Dean Bledsoe noted, we still need police to respond to calls. The fact is that police are grossly overfunded, meaning that this plan doesn't even begin to approach cutting the funds police legitimately need to respond to crime. And if it does, we can deal with it with transition periods. Additionally, it should be noted that police were created to control and respond to crime. Unfortunately, as I stated in a response to Sheriff Gonzalez's question, we've seen this trend of society assigning too many roles to officers, meaning their training is undercut by the array of duties they have to be equipped for, mentally and physically. The result is that every police officer becomes a jack of all trades and a master at none. I think the best way to resolve this is by creating specialized departments outside the police, ensuring that every social worker, every mental health counselor, and every police officer are both passionate about and superbly trained to handle their respective duties. Second, note that given the irreparable harm overpolicing and overfunding does to our most vulnerable communities, the alternative of having specialized workers in the community work inside of police departments means they get swallowed by the corrupt structure of policing in some police departments, which is never preferable. We don't want to essentially take unspoiled apples and add them to the spoiled bunch when all that would do is make the whole group uniformly spoiled. Moreover, forcing anyone who's passionate about anything remotely to do with community involvement to join the police not only makes for less motivated officers, but it also increases the likelihood of violence occurring in any nonviolent situation because of unnecessary escalation, while at the same time doing nothing to change the broken oversight structure, which provides those officers a curtain to mask any wrongful behavior, as we've seen in many departments across the country. Finally, also note the impact of deploying the most armed members of society to deal with any situation, which is ultimately unnecessary violent encounters, especially in communities that are more prone to poverty and other socioeconomic pressures. Because if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Given this, we can very reasonably and correctly make the decision to take the money currently going to extraneous roles imposed upon police and put it into outside departmental funds to those workers who are both specialized in and impassioned to pursue work in their field. What we get is a world where police still respond to calls with the same speed and arguably increase specialization and efficiency, but also a world where social work and mental health, public health, and education all get a significant boost in funding to make Houston the nation's leading example in every sector. At its most basic, this initiative is one about common sense and justice. It's one that has been long overdue, and it's also one that I am truly, truly proud to propose. Thank you.
Before we come to an end, I would like to thank the panelists, organizers, and for being here today. My opponent and I have a foundational understanding about most of the points on each case. However, there are investing into the police system is better than creating other organizations outside of the police force. One, the first reason is because of creating a system within the police force will help target injustices that happen within the police force daily. By implementing organizations within the police system, it aids in making policing better as a whole, while also effectively serving all citizens to their fullest capacity, with the help of the counselors and mental health therapists along the way. As Dean Bledsoe states, it is important to note the lack of income communities, the lack of low-income communities that will be negatively impacted by a lack of police on the field. Investing into the police will directly correlate with decreasing the number of injustices that will happen, because police will get efficient training, resources, and most importantly, mentors that will help the team along the way, allowing us to see this change. Sheriff Gonzalez states how it is important to note the low percentages of funds that are now accessible to police officers. Decreasing funds deepens the funding issues, which will lead to more violence. The second reason is because my model fundamentally helps decrease violence in communities every day. With the increase of education and training within the police force, it will allow officers to use what they learn in intensive training to be able to de-escalate situations while not unnecessarily escalating situations to begin with. It will make them more self-aware of their actions on a daily basis. You cannot access any of these benefits by taking money away from the police force, because in the end, we want to help the force, not distress them. The third reason is because the police culture will inherently transform in a positive way. Officers will now be held accountable for their actions, which will allow them to take responsibility for the things that they do on the field. This repeated brutality that we see in police culture will not further be tolerated in the status quo, creating a better culture within the force. Therefore, I ask you to join me in increasing funding to police to make them a better organization that serves all Americans. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amaya, and thank you, Mohammed. Those were both outstanding final speeches. We're going to transition to some feedback from another panel that has been waiting in the wings, watching this debate so that they can provide some feedback to our debaters. I am looking to be joined on stage now by Barbara Nofsky, who will kick off our final set of feedback for our panelists, and I will turn the stage over to you.
Thank you very much. Brilliantly done. I've been practicing law for 40 years, and you guys each are better, as were the introductions. You debaters are better than 80, 90% of lawyers in the courtroom right now, and I'm not exaggerating. In part, it's your enthusiasm. It's in great part, it's your preparation, but also you've obviously got a lot of practice under your belts, and it's very much reflected. So I thought I would just mention 3 rhetorical techniques I thought were very well used. We could go on for an hour, but I'm going to take about a minute. First, name the argument. Y'all did it. Let me give you some examples. Quote, refine the training, end quote. Quote, I'm investing for training. In other words, you made long arguments and then you either summarized them or introduced them that way, and you then referred to them later. It was easy to understand both of your complex arguments from both of you because you named them. Secondly, and really the commentators did this as much as y'all did, but you used leading questions in cross-examination. And you could see you doing it, but I want to point out Dean Bledsoe's use of leading questions just in commenting to you, where he said, aren't you just moving violence from one source to another? And when you use those kinds of techniques to lead with the question, it puts the answer on the defensive, and it was well done by both of you. Dean Bledsoe also, in the leading question, named the argument. So what you can do is combine rhetorical techniques. And I thought Dean Bledsoe had a brilliant example of that, where he just named the argument very well in his question. And lastly, use data to support your arguments. And I thought the best use of data to support the argument was Sheriff Gonzalez. How can you answer someone who's an expert in and of himself? It doesn't happen normally in a debate, and lawyers aren't experts, and so you cannot expect to be able to deal with that. Sheriff Gonzalez said, in his experience, it's an 85 to 90% figure. It's a very difficult argument to answer, particularly when Sheriff Gonzalez combined it with naming the argument, where he says, that's not a lot of fat. Now that's probably an outstanding example of combining these rhetorical techniques, again, by Sheriff Gonzalez. But in reply to Sheriff Gonzalez, we had Mohammed marshaling evidence from what happened in the cross of the debate by citing Dean Bledsoe, which is an effective use of ethos, ethical appeal, by citing a TSU very well recognized expert in civil rights and criminal law and criminal concepts. So I just thought it was A+, superbly done, and preparation really pays off. Congratulations.
Okay, can you hear me? Great. Well, let me first join the chorus of people saying congratulations. I think you both demonstrated a lot of passion and a lot of talent in how you approached it. For the most part, my comments, I will make a few niggly stylistic points. One of the things that both of you have a tendency to do is use the phrase "like" a great deal. And it's oddly enough, among the many lawyers I supervise across the country, it's a very common trait. And at some level, little things like that can make a subtle difference and can help distinguish you from opponents when you don't rely on something like that. I thought you did a good job of framing the issues. Comment was made that facts are always a great thing to utilize. I think sometimes you have to be a little careful about multiple uses of phrases that are very dramatic. Mohammed, you had a tendency to use the phrase grossly overfunded a great deal. It would have been really great, especially when something like the sheriff is coming back at you with a number. If you had some research, if you had something that said, these are the statistics that you can get nationwide. And I know they're available because, among other things, my company has its own police force. So it is easy to find that data about and to rebut that kind of claim. The one thing that I thought was very effective, Amaya, that you did with the sort of laying things out, 1, 2, 3, setting up a regular cadence like that can be very effective, particularly with a jury pool. Sometimes the more structure you can give them, the more they will retain. You've got to remember that you're always trying to pour water into a sieve. You're not pouring into a pot, and it's leaking out even as you're pouring it in. So if you give them a physical structure, sometimes that's a very helpful tool. And I thought that was well used. I thought both of you did a good job of listening to and responding to the questions. And you both employed what I think is a very effective use of not confronting the issue from the other side in a way that demonized it. It's very easy when you have people in this debate trying to say you're either for me or against me, you're for me or you're for crime. And neither of you took that low shot, neither of you did that. And you've got you did a really good job of focusing that way. One suggestion I might make that both of you consider is knowing that those stereotypes are out there. Sometimes it's very helpful if you confront them head on. And I thought, Mohammed, you actually did a better job on rebuttal than in your initial case of saying, what I'm trying to do is head off the problem before it takes a cop. What I'm trying to do is get person the treatment they need before they wind up confronting a person on the street. And that sort of policy shift to because the problems don't go away. And the sheriff gave you the problems, drug abuse, crime, all of those things. If you sit there and say, none of those things go away, or making those things go away earlier before there's a confrontation can be a lot more effective, is what I was thinking. But again, excellent job by both of you. I thought it was well done, and again, very well responded. I'll use the other Greek. You have both had a lot of pathos. I like that.
Thank you so much.
It's an honor having you.
Hello, debaters. You guys did a fantastic job. I also have some very persnickety comments for you guys. You did a really good job. So we're really only just talking to you guys about how to make the great excellent. So you shouldn't take any of these comments as if we're not suggesting that you did a fantastic job, because I think everyone unanimously acknowledges that you did. Unfortunately, I have to disagree with some of the previous comments with respect to your pacing. I think both of you guys need to slow way, way down. You have the ability to, or when you're in a circumstance like this and you are the speaker, you quite literally command the stage and you get to decide what it is you're going to say and how you're going to say it. You can use your voice in a certain sort of rhythm in order to convince the audience of how some of the things that you say are more important than others, right? Like with the use of pauses and the subtle emphasis that you can put in your speech, it's a wonderful tool that you have at your use. However, in order to take advantage of it, you have to be speaking in a way that allows me to interpret what you're saying. So I would slow way, way down if I were both of you. And frankly, I know from personal experience, once you get started going fast, that argument's just over. You're going to do that entire argument fast. There's not a whole lot you can do to stop it mid-flow. But because of this particular argument gave you guys a break in between, you had the opportunity to remodulate yourself. And I would tell you that both of you came back in a little bit more of a serene and calm pace that was made both of your rebuttals far more I think impressive, and it is probably a better exercise of what you're capable of doing. So I commend you both on that. Mohammed, I want to tell you that I felt like you had a lot of little verbal, I guess, bon mots that you use to convey your message. So, for example, you started off by talking about how historically speaking, a lot of people can't breathe, which sort of ties into the conversation that we're having nationally. And that's a very good use of your particular argument. You also talked about how we were in a public health crisis and tied your argument to the fact that this isn't just a question of policing, or even primarily a question of policing, but it's a question of safety and security of the public. So the public health crisis was very, very effective. You could have used a little bit more signposts, right? Like you could have said, I'm going to tell you the following 3 things. First, second, third. That sort of thing just helps the reader stay along with you in throughout the flow of your argument. I want to particularly commend you for your comparison when you explained the difference between 2 months of training versus 2 years of training, like how the police officers themselves were not competent to do the things that we're asking them to do, and we need to make sure that we're aware of that. And for your very first argument, your conclusion was excellent. So I have no comments about it all. It was quite simply excellent. When you came back, there was a little bit of a colloquy between you and Dean Bledsoe where you used the phrase, these people. And so I would caution you to be careful when you do that in that sort of circumstance, because it may have other connotations other than what you meant. Amaya, your intro was just a little long. I felt like it lasted longer than it should have, and I kind of got a little bit lost in it because I went somewhere else in my head. But as soon as you got into your argument, man, was it good. You did a good job of showing the passion that you felt about the argument. And I think with a little bit of slower pacing, that passion would elevate itself into poise and would make you a very, very commendable debater. And I would highly recommend you do it, because I can, in my mind, already see how great it would be if you can get that under control. You used the phrase, that's an excellent question, a little bit too much. It's almost as like a thinking stall. It's something that you can say while you organize your thoughts. But unfortunately, if you say it 4 times in a row in response to questions, it sounds a little bit like something that you say via rote. So I myself like a good thinking stall. I would just suggest you mix them up a little bit so that it isn't obvious to people that you're using them. Quite frankly, it's an excellent little technique that you're using. So I appreciate that you are doing that. I would suggest to you that you have the ability to use a little bit more of those things to buy yourselves time. Like if someone asks you a question and you tell them I have 2 points that I want to make, you bought yourself time to get through both that first and second point. So that's the thing I want to tell you. The last thing I will tell you is that you added in a quote from Sheriff Gonzalez, and you said that you want to help the force, not distress them. Those were really, really good sentences, and those are things that I remembered and wrote down, so they clearly worked. Lastly, I'll just say congratulations to you both. You're already stars.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, howdy from Houston City Hall. My name is Bill Kelly. I'm the Director of Government Relations here for Mayor Turner. So very much appreciated the dialogue and the debate this evening with it on some very familiar topics to myself with it. So I want to echo what the previous panel members have said with regards to the quality and really Nicholas in his last statement on being able to slow your voice down for emphasis really is a tool that you can use when you know you've got a strong point that rhetorically you've got, and just being able to put that fine point on it. That was a point of emphasis for me on my notes with it. So wanted to, he kind of stole my thunder on it, but just wanted to reemphasize that because both of you clearly had extremely well researched, and not just well researched, but in the course of your dialogue, you could understand your breadth of knowledge on it. It's one thing to be able to repeat, it's another to understand. And the way that you both had a conversational ability to make your points, I think is very comforting for the listener on it, and helps them relate to you as you make your argument, because I think that's really important. One of the things I did want to point out that I believe both of your arguments started with was a visualization about a 911 call. And that's such a powerful image because I think people, when you talk about body cam footage and everything like that, people have it in their mind. And so when you talked about the, I believe it was a child with special needs where you had 4 officers show up and then you had a mental health crisis on the other hand, that's really a powerful image. Being able to put that in context with it, maybe being able to refer back to that at the end. I think if you're making a case about, here is what I would like to do to change this situation, and you do have that powerful image, being able to refer back to that and tie a bow on it, I think we'll be able to give you a good wrap up with your arguments on it. Would also echo, watch for the extreme statements. Mohammed, you had used the term exorbitantly overfunded. Being able to say, instead of exorbitantly overfunded, being able to more concretely say funding for policing services has always been, the highest priority for local government, because it is. That's usually the last thing that we cut. And Sheriff Gonzalez is exactly right. City of Houston, for example, 91% of our HPD budget goes to personnel. So being able to just make it, because you do have a good point, it's the last thing, we're going to cut folks like myself, municipal workers, before we cut police officers. So you're right on the point, but just make sure that you phrase it correctly with it, because that kind of adds a very strong brick in your argument. Amaya, I thought your signposting was incredible on when you were saying, I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to tell you that, and then finally I'm going to tell you this. The only thing that I would add to that is you laid out the argument and followed it, was able to follow it perfectly on my sheet. Being able at the very end to maybe go through those 3 points very quickly, just to say, here's what I'm telling you, here's what I'm telling you, here's what I'm telling you, and here's what I told you, all 3. I think that really would tie up a lot of your really great points that you walked us through and just nail it at the end there. Right? Again, very, very strong on both sides with it. The last thing that I would add to this discussion on it, just coming from my previous to working for Mayor Turner here, I was the Director of Government Relations for Mental Health America of Greater Houston. We've been working with the Houston Police Department's Mental Health Division for a number of years. Mohammed had referred to it as a public health and used the term public health a couple of different times. One of the things that folks that deal with people who suffer from a mental illness and the fewer situations that have mental health crises that come with it is to be able to put that in the public health spectrum that it deserves to be in, right? When we have somebody break their leg We have people that are trained to be able to deal with broken legs that show up, and EMS workers that deal with that. When we have people that are suffering from a mental illness, being able to say that that is a health condition, it's literally a brain health condition, and showing up. I just think being able to understand and have that in the framework as the way you think about it. This isn't necessarily a weakness or anything that anybody could control, but just understanding, because we talked about Houston, you know, the largest city in America that doesn't have Medicaid expansion, which is the #1 payer for behavioral health services, Houston, Texas. New York, LA, Chicago, they all have it. We don't. And that kind of exacerbates a number of our problems. So making sure that we put mental health services in that healthcare service frame, which they deserve to be in, I think is a good, important part. That's just kind of a personal riff on that you get from me. But exceptional job from everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your feedback. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. It was great having you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and thank you to Mohammed and Amaya. Fantastic work tonight. I'm Jason Powers. I'm a partner at the law firm of Vincent & Elkins, and I am a member of the board of directors of the Houston Urban Debate League tonight, an especially proud member of the board, because what you've seen tonight here, it obviously is a unique format of debate for this very special event, but it is a perfect example of what the Houston Urban Debate League is for. It's about getting high school students engaged in and thinking about the most important issues of our day and giving them the tools they need to develop their own points of view about those issues and the tools they need to express those points of view in compelling and powerful ways. But it's about more than that, right? It's about making sure that every student, no matter where they're from, no matter what obstacles they face in life, they need the confidence to know they have a voice, and that voice deserves to be heard. And if they want to be a full participant in our democracy, if they want to be leaders someday, it's time to get started now developing that voice. And there is nothing that gives students confidence, nothing that gives them the ability to do that more than practicing the use of those special muscles of analysis and persuasion. And there is nothing that gets students more excited about practicing the use of those special muscles, nothing more than competition, the thrill of competition, the excitement, the fun of getting engaged with other students and mixing it up in a debate format or in this special online format we've had tonight. That's why we wanted to make sure that debate was not just going to be left for students in private schools. It was not just going to be for those students who are lucky enough to go to a public school that's well funded. It should be for everybody. When we started Huddle, there was literally one Houston Independent School District that was still offering competitive debate to its students. Last year, we had Huddle students at nearly 50 high schools and 12 middle schools from HISD and 7 other school districts around the greater Houston area. We had more than 800 students participating in tournaments. More than 55% of them were young women. Around 90% of them were racial or ethnic minorities. And this summer, we had more than 120 of our most engaged students join us for a week-long summer camp. And it was a rigorous program. They're spending literally 12 to 14-hour days online, learning their craft, getting connected with talented debate coaches from around the country, as well as our volunteers here in the Houston area, and getting excited about the year ahead so they could go back to their own high schools and talk about what was about to happen and how all their fellow students could get excited about it as well. In the 12 years we've been operating, we've awarded more than $175,000 in college scholarships, to say nothing of the scholarships that our students earned all on their own, using the kinds of skills and talents that they honed and practiced in high school debate. Now, none of that just happened. It happened because Houstonians like you thought it was important. It happened because people like you wanted to make sure that the next generation of Houstonians would get this educational opportunity. And if you want to be a part of that, please let us know. Go to our website, HoustonUrbanDebate.org. Find out more about our program. If you'd like to get involved, if you'd like to judge rounds like the one you saw tonight, there's an opportunity for you to do that. You can see our tournament calendar on the website. You will have the opportunity to get involved. It's easier than ever, frankly, because we're in an all online tournament environment right now. So you can get involved. And of course, we could always use your financial support. With your help, we're able to do things like award scholarships and sponsor tournament attendance and run our summer camps. So, there is no Houston Urban Debate League without Houston. And if without your help, we can't do the things that we want to accomplish. For tonight, I want to say thank you to our debaters, Mohammed and Amaya. Fantastic work. For our panelists, our extraordinarily distinguished panelists, thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening and sharing your thoughts with these debaters. And to our friends at Naudle, HISD, CASE, our sponsors, Massey and Gale, and the Asia Group Foundation, thank you for helping make tonight happen. And for all those of you who just stopped by to say hello, we thank you for your support. Good night.